Welcome to Mentoring in Real Life, where we talk about what it takes to find and be a great mentor. I'm Angela, and together with my co-host Bill, we know the power of mentoring and what it can do in your life on both sides of the table. If you're interested in learning tips, tricks, and hearing stories about mentoring, you're in the right place. Come join us.
Hi, Bill. How you doing?
Never been this happy, Angela. How about you?
I am tippy-tappy with a song in my heart.
Hey, that's awesome.
You and I know that saying well. It's from a morning show from San Diego.
One of the best.
One of the
But
best.
they're retired like I am, except I'm not really retired, but
You're here with me.
exactly.
So in today's podcast, we are focused on describing the difference between mentoring, coaching, and being an advocate in the workplace. As we prepared for this podcast and we were chatting before actually recording, we realized these disciplines are also applicable for life, not just in the workplace, to have a mentor, a coach, and an advocate. An older or more seasoned person, more experienced person can be a coach or an advocate or a mentor for someone younger. That's why we have programs like Big Brother, Big Sister, for example. Today, though, we're delving into primarily how these are used in the workplace, and we'll talk later in future podcasts about how these can be addressed for life skills. Did I miss anything, Bill?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. But, in the other casts so far, you've done a lot of the question asking. But for this one, since only one of us is a certified professional coach and it ain't me, I think we're going to change it up a little bit today. And I'll start asking some questions. I might have something to contribute along the way, but I'm going to let you lead a lot of the conversation today. So as we're getting started here, you talked about mentorship and coaching and advocacy. So what's the difference between those three?
The big difference can be defined in looking at the focus, the approach, the scope of each, and then the relationship that the one person has to the other. So for example, with coaching, the focus is really on improved performance and personal development for the client. The coach really doesn't give answers as far as approach is concerned. The coach really is there to ask a lot of questions, provide feedback to the client, and really help the coachee discover their own solutions. This is not advice giving. And a coach-client relationship is often shorter in duration than some of these other relationships might be. It could be long-term. You could have a coach for years. And what happens, though, is the nature of the engagement changes a little bit. So initially, when a coach and a client get together, the coach really asks the client, what is it you want to work on? And so there's a defined challenge that the client is really looking to get some help navigating through. And the coach then helps the client come up with their own solutions, their own way ahead. And it's really focused on specific goals. Some of those might be improving leadership skills. Some might be how to handle conflict better, or getting set up for an interview for a particular job that they're looking for, or figuring out what their next career move might be, helping boost productivity. That might be a challenge that the client brings to the coach, and the coach helps them navigate that. Mentoring, however, that focus is a little different. That's more intentional for long-term career growth, development of the individual in a professional standpoint. And the mentor shares knowledge with the mentee about how to navigate within the confines of their particular industry or their particular company or on down the leadership chain. So the approach is a lot different than with coaching initially as mentor-mentee relationship is established.
It sure feels like there might be some overlap. I mean, certainly I know in some of my mentoring conversations, I was using some of those skills. So I hope we're going to talk a little bit more about overlap between those things.
We will.
Okay.
Absolutely, especially how to use skills, coach-like skills as a mentor. So to your point, a mentor still asks questions, still can come with a very curious mind to the mentee, still can help the mentee solve particular challenges. The big difference comes from the lens that the mentor has compared with a coach. A mentor really comes with their own glasses on, if you will, or their own hat on. What advice might they have based on their knowledge and experience in the industry or in the type of role that the mentee is interested in getting into or that is navigating their professional path in? And so it's not to say that a mentor can't leverage coach-like skills. In fact, that's incredibly powerful, and we'll get deeper into that in a future pod. But it is to say that the mentor can also very freely give advice, and that is not what a coach does. So a coach might also take their coaching hat off and put a mentor hat on and give advice. And we can talk about examples of that.
We will.
I think you in particular have a story about that or two, right? And I certainly do for my coaching engagements as well. But when advice is given, the coach is no longer being a coach. The coach is actually being a mentor. And that is an important distinction. So mentoring, though, it can be much more informal. So a coach kind of relationship usually starts with an agreement, like a signed agreement about what the role is between a coach, what the role is between the client, and what coaching really can encompass. Coaching is not therapy. When you are a certified coach, like I am, there are some ethical responsibilities at being a coach. And those are identified as part of a coaching agreement. Those are discussed before the true engagement starts. And the client has a lot of clarity on that, as well as the coach making sure that he or she conveys that message appropriately. A mentoring relationship can often be very informal. That's how yours and mine started, certainly.
Sure.
It wasn't this like, Bill, will you be my mentor? And you and I signed some document. It was more like, hey, can we have a conversation? I'd like
Right.
to talk with you about something.
Of course.
And that's really how the mentoring engagements often start. You know, you and I have also talked about the importance of, if you're a mentee looking for a mentor, asking, will you be my mentor, can be very effective. It can also be effective to say, can we have a conversation?
Sure.
And from there, it can be much more of a enduring mentoring relationship as well. An advocate is in a different realm altogether. An advocate is really somebody who is senior in an organization, in an industry, in a company, who advocates on your behalf, who recommends you to take on a certain role, to take on a certain project, to take on a certain opportunity. It gives visibility to the individual that they might not otherwise have. An advocate actively speaks up for you, might open some doors, gives you introductions, gives you access to resources and promotions and so forth. So the advocate, really, their approach is to use their influence on your behalf. They're more about sponsorship than they are about teaching. So an example of that might be a leader who recommends you for a stretch project or a promotion when you're not actually in the room. They talk to their peers, to their colleagues, to their senior leaders, and advocates your name, you specifically, for a particular role or title.
Sure. I mean, I got to see that quite a bit, obviously, when I was directing the organization we worked at. In the promotion boards, having an advocate was actually fundamental to people getting promoted in those boards. In almost any place, everybody's looking. Certainly where we work, people were looking for the equation. If I do this, this, and this, then I'll get promoted, right? I had many, many mentoring conversations with folks about what that really looks like. And shockingly, promotion boards are based on people voting on somebody.
Mm-hmm.
It's just people knowing or not knowing that person and their skills and their potential. And so having an advocate in those kinds of situations is critical, absolutely critical to showing well in that board where the person you're talking about is not in the room. And so
Right.
having that advocacy that you're talking about is the way that you succeed in an organization, is that people who are voting on things like promotions are in a place where they're hearing about you from your advocate. And there you go. Now you got promoted because you had done the work. This isn't favoritism. It's people looking at who's out there, knowing them and knowing what they have to offer and sharing that in a promotion board. That's not that's just the way stuff works. And it's not, there's no issues in ethics or anything else like that. It's people voting for somebody.
Hmm. Which is a big reason why visibility is so important. If you're referencing specifically promotion boards, advocacy can happen in so many different ways.
Of course.
It could be for taking on a stretch project that the person might not have experience or a background in yet, right? But they're not going to get it until they're in it. They're not going to get it until they have that role.
Right.
An advocate could be because you're interviewing for a new job and you're asking that person or that person offers to be your advocate to take on that job specifically, either within your organization or outside of it. An advocate is really somebody who recommends you for some particular, again, promotion, role, responsibility. It could even be something like we would have in our organization, we had something called Tech Board. And this was a few day offsite where a small group of folks, relatively small to the size of the organization, got together and had some future problem that we considered. And you had to be actually nominated to participate in Tech Board. And so that person who is nominating you is your advocate
You
to
bet.
participate in it. And it was a great opportunity for anybody who was able to participate to say, what's a future problem that our organization is interested in? And how can I get involved in soup to nuts helping to solve that problem?
Right. Well, and the other part that underlies that, the advocate got you into the room, and all of the senior folks were in that room already, and they brought in additional folks from elsewhere in the organization. The advocacy was in getting you in the room, the talking about the problems and demonstrating your skill sets in front of a room of the senior leaders at the organization. That advocate did you a huge favor by nominating you to attend this thing, because now you get face time with people you typically don't. And so it's what we've talked about previously in that advocate role, of the importance of getting closer to people who you just will never have that opportunity to do so, except that somebody brought you into the room with all the seniors.
When you're saying that, it reminds me of something that's fundamental, regardless of mentoring or coaching or advocacy, is the personal responsibility that the individual has for his or her career. Each of these might open doors or open insights, but it is up to the individual to perform.
Of course.
I believe this aligns with one of the 7 habits.
You think so? I would call it habit 1. I mean, if you want something to happen, it's on you to make it, to influence a different outcome if you're not happy with where you are so far. And so I appreciate you, throwing me a softball like that. But absolutely, if you go into the room and you sit there quietly listening to everybody and never contribute, you're not taking advantage of what was offered to you. And that's a choice you would be making. Hopefully not. And so you get those opportunities. It doesn't mean go in there and start telling everybody what to do. It means going in there and participating, being a good team member, leading things if it's offered to you, and stepping up. And so, as you said, it's obviously a choice. It's great that the advocate got you in the room. Now it's on you to step up and be that great teammate and leader. We should talk at some point about leadership. Obviously, at least one of those definitions is that being a leader is the art of gaining followers. And so there are leadership positions for sure, but there are leadership moments and leadership events. If Angela walks in the room and it's a whole bunch of senior people in the room, and she has a good idea, and one of those senior leaders says, "That's a good idea. Let's do what Angela said." That's a leadership event. And so when you have those opportunities as the mentee, step up and lead opportunities like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was throwing you a softball because, as we've already asserted, you are an unpaid ambassador for 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And
I should look into that.
anytime we can bring it up, we will.
Fair enough. I'm good with that. It obviously has had I believe it has had a significantly positive impact on not just my work life, but my family life as well. We can get into that more later.
We will. So we've defined coaching and mentoring and advocacy, but I'm curious, can you tell me an experience you've had with either a mentor, a coach, or an advocate? How is this used in real life?
Sure. So the most impactful one that comes to mind right away is that when I first became a department head at our organization, and for those who don't know, a department head is sort of the first level below the CEO are the department heads. And so the CEO at the time, my boss, said, hey, Bill, now that you're a department head, have you ever considered having an executive coach? To which I said, well, no, ma'am, I hadn't. But right now I'm thinking about it an awful lot. What interests my boss fascinates me. And so I got an executive coach. And that was one of the most impactful relationships I had as a department head that I carried actually on into my time as the executive director. I did get an assigned coach. And that job, I'll give him a shout out. Kevin Corcoran was my coach, and he was phenomenal for me and for my career. And we developed a good coaching relationship and over 7 years, then a friendship. And he was superb at asking those questions that you talked about as sort of the fundamental part of coaching, and spent an awful lot of time saying, so what is it you want to accomplish as a department head? Okay, so what would it take to do that? And what is the logical approach you would use to get there? And who do you need to talk to about that? And what resources are you going to need to get that done? And how would you implement that? What's the next step you would take to go get that done? And so in addition to asking probing questions, those very powerful sets of questions, he also spent a lot of time giving me, letting me choose a date and holding me accountable to those dates. I mean, we'd have our monthly meeting and that'd be 3 weeks in. And it's like, crap, I haven't made that phone call I promised him I'd do. And I would do it because I didn't want to ever show up in front of him and not have the work that I had assigned myself completed by the time I was supposed to have it done. That was phenomenally powerful to have that accountability and have somebody who had nothing invested in this other than my success. He was going to get paid to do the job he was doing regardless of that. All he cared about was, how do I help this guy progress in what he wants to get done? And that became a model. We developed a strategy for engineering that became a model for the department that I then carried on when I got promoted to be the executive director. And I asked Kevin to continue on as my coach because I had bigger and broader ideas on what I wanted to do. And I said, and I want you around to help ask the right questions and to hold me accountable for making progress. And so I found that to be absolutely critical. And as it turned out, very, very effective in getting things done. And even though the other part that I would love to talk about just for a second is, so these are long-term goals that I was setting up with the coach. And we would have these strategic plans that said, okay, in 5 years, I'll get to this nirvana state. And it turns out that once you actually commit to it and you have a coach who's keeping you on track, 5 years to that state we had planned on actually turned out to be 2. It just was astounding how much having somebody who's helping you really focus and really commit to stuff is effective for your career and for your success. And so I am forever indebted to Kevin for the great work that he did with me. And that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons when one of my mentees came to me and said, I want to have a coaching program, that I was so positive about it, that I helped advocate for her to be successful in establishing a coaching program that goes on to this day. I think you've heard of her. I know we talked about it in the other one, but in case this is the first cast you've listened to, I'm happy to point at the great success that you had by setting up that coaching program.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And actually, interestingly, you just demonstrated that you were both my mentee as well as my advocate. So a person can be more than one role. A person can be a coach and a mentee or mentor, and an advocate for somebody, sometimes even in the same conversation. Just getting clarity on what type of hat the person is wearing is helpful. You also mentioned that this 5-year plan that you had actually turned out to be 2. That's an incredibly important point. The whole reason, one of the big reasons why I think both of us believe so heartily in mentoring and actually coaching as well is it gets somebody to where they want to be faster than they would on their own.
It certainly did for me. It was absolutely invaluable, and it sort of is a healthy lesson about once you commit to something and commit in the very serious meaning of the word, not committing like I'd like to go have lunch today. Committed like this is what I'm going to be focused on in my professional life now and for the next several years. It becomes life changing for the experience you're going to have in your profession.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you didn't say, "This is what you are gonna do in your career," as the mentor.
No, the last thing people need is for me to think that I'm the smartest person in the room.
Well, and that's the key for any mentoring and coaching engagement. It's not incumbent upon the mentor or the coach to define success for the individual. It is up to the individual to define his or her success.
How could I possibly be smarter than you about what's best for you?
Right. Right.
That ain't happening. So yeah, that's critical. It fits with the conversation we talked about last time, listening first as the mentor to make sure they understand what it is you think is right for you.
Right. Right. And so a person can be all three, a mentor, a coach, and an advocate, perhaps even in the same conversation. We just identified certainly a time that you, as my mentor, also became my advocate for building out the coaching program in our old organization. And that continued on. That wasn't the only thing you were my advocate for.
I would like to think I continued to advocate fairly well for you.
Yes, you did. You did. So I'm curious though, when you have seen these work in a person's career journey, what have you seen on the early career side?
So early in your career, if you have a mentor, I actually had this experience the other night, as it turns out. I wasn't even in a work situation, but for young people who are earlier in their career, helping folks to learn the ropes, if it's people you know in your industry, is helping learn how it works in the industry and making sure that perhaps they can avoid some of the mistakes may have made when you were first starting out and help them build some confidence. But as I said, you can actually do that with as a person who's been around for a while. You can be mentoring people. I mentored a waiter at a restaurant the other night, and it was because he engaged in a very positive way. You're retired. How did you get there? How do I get to be where you are? And so we had a mentoring conversation because he's just entering the workforce and he's trying to figure out how to avoid mistakes and how do I balance all the work life issues, et cetera. So those early career mentoring moments can happen almost at any time, as it turns out. And you can have a really positive influence on somebody, whether they work for you or they're an acquaintance who just needs a little bit of help and guidance as they're starting out. So, I mean, that was been terrific as a mentor. But so how would that work for a coach?
Well, early in a person's career, a coach can certainly help the individual determine, are they even in the path that they want to be in right now? And not to define their 20, 30, 40-year career, but where they are right now and the role that they're in right now. Where what do they want to look like as a leader? And I'm not saying physical appearance. I'm saying how they want to show up as a worker in their environment, either as a leader or a subject matter expert or a engineer or whatever their role might be. How do they want to show up? A coach can help them define it, help them identify where they're doing well and where they need improvement. So it really helps with sharpening a lot of those leadership skills. It's a new skill set once you got to show up to work, to your 9 to 5 or your normal job day to day. And there's a whole new way of organizing oneself. There's a whole new way of making sure that you understand what the landscape looks like and how to get there. And so a coach can really help that early career person figure out what's important, how to keep themselves organized, how to prioritize, and really identify where do they want to go from there.
Yeah, it's well, and I think we should not underestimate that coaching offer for somebody who's new to the workforce. As I said, my my first real coaching experience didn't happen until I was very senior in the organization. But having a coach help them figure out how this is all supposed to work at the most junior levels could be an invaluable set of resources to help understand how the work culture is supposed to look like and what you need to do to be a valuable contributor early in your career. So those words are invaluable, frankly.
Well, and this is, as you already know, for the audience's perspective, one of the main reasons why I saw an opportunity to bring coaching into our organization was because of that. Because up until we had a program internal to the organization, the only people that did have access to coaching were our senior executives. And to me, I saw that as, well, what would it look like if our individual contributors had a better sense of what it means to be a good leader for them? If a person wants to grow from being an individual contributor into a leadership role, that is a whole different skill set. And so having somebody, quite frankly, both a mentor and a coach can help that individual navigate and perhaps grow into that position faster than they might otherwise take if
Yeah.
they're just trying to learn it on their own.
Well, yeah, all the rest of us who got to senior leadership roles without that fumbled the ball along the way, and had to do a lot of learning. So that a lot of what we're talking about in this set of podcasts is to talk about how do I help people learn that stuff without necessarily having to fumble along the way as much as I did in the past.
That's right.
And so coaching and mentoring are certainly intended to help people sort of focus and get a leg up on doing things all by yourself without that kind of help.
That's right. That's right.
So now you've been around a little bit and you're sort of in the middle of your career. How does that change the model? Now that when you're first starting, you're probably not going to have the need for an advocate, but as you get to mid-career, maybe now mentoring, coaching, and advocacy all three of them start to become more important. So what's that start to look like for mid-career?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, assuming that, early in your career, you've learned some skill sets like how to meet your milestones, how to brief well, how to deal with difficult communications in the workplace, and that kind of thing. Now you're in the middle of your career. Ideally, you have grown in your roles, right? And so a mentor gives you some perspective on how to take on specialization. Maybe you want to be more of a subject matter expert versus leadership. A mentor might be able to give you some insight onto some shifts that they see in your industry or how to help navigate work-life balance, because as you get into the middle of your career, your life likely has started to change some too. Perhaps you have a partner or a spouse, perhaps you have children, perhaps you just have a bigger friend group that you want to spend more time with. Whatever it is that you like to spend your time doing outside of the workplace, that starts to get more complex in the middle of your career. And so a mentor might help you learn how to navigate that. A coach will help you sharpen some leadership skills. Things like as you grow in your roles, this means you have more responsibility, more authority, and likely team members to help you with navigating those responsibilities, navigating that authority. And so learning the art of delegation is something that each individual needs to learn in order to grow in their responsibilities, because it doesn't get any easier as responsibilities increase. And when I say it, I mean the level of work, the level of effort that it's going to take to get the job done. You just get more responsibility means more work. And so you've got to learn the art of delegation. You've got to learn how to have better executive presence, how to negotiate more effectively. So coaching helps in those aspects. Advocacy, this is where advocacy can really be crucial. This is when your advocates give you that visibility that we talked about previously. They really push for you to lead specific projects. They really push for your promotions. They really push for that visibility so that you have visibility to senior leaders.
Undoubtedly. So, frankly, the whole coaching conversation that we talked about with you setting a program is as far as I'm concerned, a concrete example of advocacy mid-career. I mean, I know it's towards the more senior middle part of your career. It doesn't matter. The point was, getting the advocacy lead an effort across the whole organization was sort of a big piece of getting you the opportunity. I didn't do anything other than provide advocacy. You did the work to create the program, to implement the program, to deliver the program. So, but that advocacy was absolutely critical, I think, to getting it off the ground. And, thankfully I had somebody who was going to do the work and get it done. And a comment we hadn't really brought up much, I get to celebrate that as the mentor. And so for all your mentors, like, is there a reward? Well, sure, there's plenty of reward. And the biggest one is seeing your mentees be successful. And so I was very thankful for you taking that on like you did and delivering such a positive program for the organization.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, speaking of senior leadership, and when you were the executive director or the CEO essentially of our organization, did you still have a mentor? How did a mentor work at that level in your career?
Well, yeah. So I had the good fortune to continue to have mentors throughout my career. In fact, I still have them to this day, even in my semi-retirement. It's still incredibly valuable to be able to talk to people who have been this route before and have advice and have a sounding board. It says, look, if that's where you're trying to get to, you might want to think about it this other way than what you've been demonstrating, Bill. And so those are invaluable conversations, even as the senior, in this room, I'm the senior guy, but I'm not the smartest or the most senior person in the planet. And there's lots of smart people out there. And I'm fortunate to have those mentors still engage with me. So forcing you to think strategically, longer term about stuff, as opposed to being wrapped up. You're a senior leader in the organization and there's 1,000 fires going on at any given time. But as a senior, your job isn't to be really putting out fires. It's still to have a focus on strategic thought and where the organization is going. And so having people to remind you on occasion, okay, Bill, we're going to take care of that one. Where are we going next? Is a really important part of the conversation. And so having a mentor as a senior person was very, very valuable. I would never advocate for saying, once you get to be senior, you're so smart, you don't need mentors anymore. That in addition to being stupid to have an approach like that I might have, it just works so much better to have folks you can use as a sounding board, even as a very senior person.
Yeah. And you've already talked about using a coach at that level as well and how impactful that was.
Clearly, I continued with my buddy Kevin, and he was, as I said, our relationship changed a little bit just because we've worked together so long. He was coach and friend. And I do have to admit, on occasion, because you talked about the fact that coaches just ask questions, they don't give advice. I have to admit, once I got to be a little bit more senior, because he was doing executive coaching with lots of other people, so he had a viewpoint from lots of other places. On occasion, I would say, I need you to take off your flippin' coaching hat for 2 seconds and tell me what you think I should do about this.
Mm-hmm.
And not because I'm afraid to make a decision, but I did want to have a perspective from this guy who had all of his experience with other senior executives in other positions, in other situations. Why wouldn't I want to hear from him about advice and things that he's seen work someplace else?
Right.
So, I mean, those relationships are powerful and they can flex between coaching and mentoring.
Yes, I can attest to that as well. The number of times that clients have asked, "What would you do?" Or, "Come on, tell me what you think I should do."
Right.
It's innumerable. It's innumerable.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it's important to say when somebody's saying, "Tell me what I should do," they're particularly the more senior they get, they're not asking you to, listen. I don't want to take responsibility for my decision. You tell me what to do. They're looking for real advice,
Right.
and it doesn't get you off the hook. You're the one making the decision, so nobody should be afraid to say, "Hey, man, tell me what I should do."
Yeah.
Because you don't have to do that. We're back to the habit of choice there. You can still choose to do something different, but it's okay to have that conversation. And if you're coaching somebody, it's okay to occasionally say, well, if I was you, I think this is the thing. These are the things I've seen work in the past.
Yep. Yep. And advocacy still happens at that senior level as well.
Oh my gosh. So when I was the executive director, yeah, you're the boss of your organization, but particularly in the government, there was plenty of organizations that were senior to me. And
Right.
so when I'm trying to do something that's influencing something, some event or some process or some policy outside my organization, I needed serious advocacy continuing as the executive director. I needed advocacy outside the organization above where we were. So it totally fits even for the senior executives. It's hard for me to imagine a position that couldn't use advocacy, even if you're at the top of your organization. You're not in charge of the world around you. So advocacy is an important aspect of that opportunity, whatever you're trying to accomplish.
That's right. That's right. This discussion has really highlighted that having all three disciplines, coaches, mentors, and advocates, really is highly beneficial for any career and really in life. Coaches help you perform, mentors help you learn, and advocates help you advance. What else would you like to add to conclude today?
No, I think you captured it quite well. I guess I would end by saying thanks to everybody for listening to this episode of Mentoring in Real Life. If you have thoughts or questions, feel free to leave us a comment or send us an email, which we've included in the show notes. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, rate the podcast, and share with a friend. Until next time, help others climb.